The Hero's Quest. In a peaceful village, there lived a chieftain named James, his wife Linda, and their daughter Mary. Mary spent her days like other village girls, tending to the camels and helping her mother with household chores. She was a beautiful and cheerful girl, beloved by all for her beauty and kind nature. One day, Mary went with the other girls to gather firewood from the forest. While collecting wood, she found a golden spindle and hid it in her belt so her friends wouldn't see it. When they finished their work and the sun began to set, each girl packed her bundle and prepared to return home, except for Mary. Every time she tied her bundle, it fell apart and scattered on the ground. The other girls grew impatient and left before nightfall. In the end, Mary took out the spindle and said to herself, "I will hide it and come back tomorrow to retrieve it." She chose a large tree, placed the spindle under it, and covered it with dry leaves. As she turned to leave, she found a hideous ogre standing before her. He said, "I will punish you for stealing the spindle, for everything on this land belongs to me." Mary was terrified and began to cry. "How could a little girl know that?" she asked. The ogre replied, "I will forgive you this time, but if your mother ever makes butter, I will come and take you." He then disappeared without a trace. When Mary returned to the village, she told her mother, Linda, everything that had happened. In those days, women would make butter, place it in clay jars, and bury it in the ground, only to eat from it after a year. Linda was afraid for her daughter and refrained from making butter. Years passed, and Mary grew into a beautiful young woman. Her cousin John, a handsome young man, proposed to her, promising a dowry of 100 camels. He left to gather the dowry for his cousin, and that's what happened to him. As for Mary, she remained in the village, tending to her father's camels and helping her mother like the other girls. One night, her mother had guests and didn't want to cook without seasoned butter, so she borrowed some from a neighbor. When Mary tasted the food, she was deeply saddened and said, "You didn't heed my warning, Mother. The ogre will surely come tonight." Linda replied, "We didn't make it ourselves, we borrowed it from someone else." But the ogre, enchanted by Mary's beauty, saw it as an opportunity to come and take her. When Mary looked out of the tent, she saw him standing near the pegs and said in a thunderous voice, "Mary, give me a torch." She replied, "My mother will give it to you." He said, "Curse you and her, bring the torch." She replied, "My aunt will give it to you." He said, "May she and you be damned, hurry up and bring the torch." She replied, "My grandmother will give it to you." He said, "May you both be blind, my patience has run out. The torch, or I will take revenge on the tribe." Mary entered the tent, gave her clothes to her maid, and covered her head. When she came out with the torch, the ogre snatched her and ran deep into the forest, thinking she was Mary. When the ogre reached his cave, he removed the covering from the girl's head and found that she was not Mary. He became furious and decided to deceive her. He went to a road where merchants passed and hid behind a large tree. After an hour, a merchant came leading a herd of camels. The ogre emerged and said, "I will let you pass safely if you do me a favor. If you refuse, your camels will be my food." The man was terrified and agreed, "I will do whatever you want. These camels are all I have." The ogre said, "Listen, I will turn into a camel and accompany you to the market. If someone offers you 100, say 200, if they say 200, say 3, If they say 3, say 4, until Mary's father from the esteemed tribe of James comes. Sell me to him for whatever price he offers. Do you understand?" Then the ogre turned into a docile camel and walked with the merchant. The merchant and the ogre, now a camel, traveled until they reached the market. People admired the camel and crowded around, increasing their offers. The merchant followed the ogre's instructions, refusing lower offers until Mary's father arrived. He examined the camel and found it to be a noble camel. He asked, "How much is it?" The merchant replied, "I will take whatever you offer." Mary's father said, "Will 50 gold dinars suffice?" The merchant nodded in agreement. Mary's father took the camel home, despite the protests of others. He was delighted, for it was a remarkable and gentle camel, rare in its breed. Children played around it while it watched them kindly. One day, Mary told her father, "James, father, you have brought my enemy, the ogre, and put him beside me. He will end my life far away." James was puzzled and said, "How could this camel be your enemy?" She remained silent, knowing he wouldn't believe her. The next day, James called her to tend the camels as usual, but she refused, saying, "I won't tend them as long as that camel is among them." She stayed that way for a day or two until her father grew angry and forced her to go out with the camels. She left, tears filling her eyes, feeling that she would never see the village again. Once they were a little distance away, the ogre returned to his true form, seized her, and said, "No one can escape from me, Mary." He then placed her on his back and traveled across lands and valleys. When the camels returned in the evening, Mary and the camel were missing. James realized his daughter's truth and regretted not listening to her. Mary's mother never stopped crying, as her daughter was about to marry her cousin John. When John's mother, Sarah, heard the news, she came to Linda and said, "What will I tell my son when he returns from his journey? Should I tell him you let Mary be taken by the ogre?" Linda replied in despair, "We'll say she died." Sarah asked, "And if he asks about her grave?" Linda thought for a moment and said, "We'll dig a grave and place a wooden board in it. He won't dare to dig it up. Find him another bride, he'll forget her over time." After a while, John returned from his journey, joyful with the gifts and goods he brought. He said to his mother, "Look what I brought for Mary." But Sarah didn't respond. He saw the gloom and sadness on her face and asked, "For God's sake, Mother, what happened to Mary? Did she marry another man?" With tears in her eyes, Sarah replied, "More than that, Mary died. May God give you patience for your love for her." When he heard that from his mother, the light in his face turned to darkness, and he stayed in his room for days without eating or drinking. A shepherd heard about John's condition and came to him, saying, "I will tell you something. I don't know if it will ease your suffering or increase it. I was herding my sheep and saw your mother digging a grave. I don't know what she put in it, but it surely wasn't Mary. It was something hard covered with a shroud. I was surprised by that." John immediately took a pickaxe and dug up the grave. When he lifted the shroud, he found a wooden board. He returned to his mother and said, "If you don't tell me the truth, I will end my life." She told him the entire story from beginning to end. John swore never to return to the village until he found his beloved Mary or perished trying. John traveled across plains and rivers, searching for Mary, until he reached a tree with a melancholic owl on it. He asked about her condition. The owl replied, "A girl passed by here, taken by the ogre. She was crying and singing, 'Poor Mary, no family loves her anymore. You won't see her, you won't celebrate her, you won't hear her voice. Oh, my sorrow for you, John, the pain of separation is indescribable.'" When John heard Mary's song and felt her longing for him, he wept and his tears fell. The owl, feeling sympathy for him, said, "Follow this path, and you'll reach the mountain of the 7 springs. In one of its caves, you'll find your beloved. But this mountain is guarded by an old spirit, said to be over 200 years old, and he won't let you in without a password. Listen, young man, the answer is simple, just observe what is around you." When John reached the end of the path, he saw a tall mountain touching the clouds and 2 rocks tightly joined together. Suddenly, an old man with a white beard appeared and asked, "What brings you to the mountain inhabited by spirits and monsters?" John told his story, and the old man replied, "There is nothing I can do, the gate won't open without the password. But I can help you escape from the ogre." John asked, "What is your advice?" The old man said, "What is the palace with yellow inside and outside, with yellow inhabitants, that closes by the power of the Almighty and opens with iron?" John pondered, finding the riddle difficult. Remembering the owl's advice, he looked around and saw a pomegranate tree with yellow fruits. He smiled and said to the old man, "A melon, it is yellow inside and outside, and its seeds are yellow, opened with a knife of iron." As soon as he finished speaking, the rocks parted, revealing a narrow passage between them. John walked through the passage, looking left and right as the mountain was vast and filled with caves. He wondered which cave might contain Mary and how he would find her. As he continued walking, he suddenly saw a girl fetching water from a spring. He approached her, and when he got closer, she hid her face. He asked, "Have you seen a girl who was taken by the ogre a few days ago?" She replied, "And what do you want with her?" He answered, "I am her fiancé, and I came to save her." When she heard this, she lifted her veil, and John gasped, for it was Mary's maid. She said, "I didn't recognize you, your face has paled, and your beard has grown long." He replied, "From the sorrow of being away from Mary, if I remain without her, I will die." The maid led John to a large cave and asked him to wait. After a while, Mary came and threw herself into his arms, then said, "Come, let me hide you, we can't escape until the ogre falls asleep." She took a large bowl, covered him with it, and sat on top. After an hour, the ogre returned, having caught a wild boar. He entered and threw it on the ground, then sniffed the air and said, "Something is strange in my home, I smell something familiar." Mary replied, "There is no one here but me and my maid." The ogre searched everywhere except under the bowl, saying, "I am sure someone was here, perhaps they just left." The ogre cooked the boar and Mary gave him a jar of wine. After drinking, he fell into a deep sleep, holding onto Mary's long hair to prevent her from escaping. Mary spoke to the ants that came to collect food scraps, saying, "If you free my hair from the ogre's hand, I will give you a handful of sugar." The ants called their companions and freed Mary's hair, strand by strand. Mary then mixed henna and applied it to everything around to keep it silent and not wake the ogre, but she forgot the mortar. When Mary, John, and the maid left, the mortar started to pound and said, "Wake up, ogre, sound the drums, Mary has escaped from the city." The ogre reached out but did not find her beside him. He left the cave shouting, "Mary, I will not let you escape today." John, Mary, and the maid reached the gate. The old man told them, "Don't touch anything in the forest, and don't interfere with anything that doesn't concern you, or the ogre will find you and capture you." They promised and continued walking through the wilderness. After a while, they found a pearl necklace on the ground, but passed it by and left it alone. Then they found a clear water pond, and the maid drank from it. A large bird came and swallowed her. Despite their deep sadness, John and Mary continued walking. They traversed hills and valleys, finding a small rabbit with a broken leg. John said, "I must bandage its wound, or it will die." As he took it in his hands, the bird reappeared and snatched him along with the maid. Mary hid among the trees until the bird left, then ran until she was exhausted, not knowing where she was going. When she passed by the owl, it called out to her, "You cannot escape from the ogre. He knows your scent and will follow you wherever you go. But I will turn you into a dark-skinned girl, and he won't find you. Don't mention your fiancé John, no matter how much you miss him. The ogre will send ravens to listen to the words of loving girls. If you sing about your sorrows like last time, the ravens will tell him your whereabouts, and he will come and kill you." Mary asked, "Will I see John again?" The owl replied, "I don't know, you must be patient. Now close your eyes." When Mary opened her eyes, she found herself a dark-skinned girl with deep brown skin. She was distressed and asked, "Will I stay like this forever?" The owl said, "A kiss on your forehead from your lover will return you to your true form. Head east, John came searching for you from that direction." As the owl finished speaking, it flew away and disappeared. Mary walked tirelessly, unable to forget John. Whenever she felt like singing her sorrows as she used to, she remembered the owl's warning, which increased her worry. When she reached John's village, she went to his uncle and asked for work. He assigned her to tend the goats and milk the cows, unaware that she was Mary. He housed her in the barn. The poor girl endured this harsh life, hoping that John would return. One day, a merchant came to the village, wearing clothes similar to John's and a turban like his. When Mary saw him, she dropped the milk jug and ran towards him, singing, "John has returned, no need for reproach. How sweet is the presence of loved ones after a long absence." The merchant looked at her in surprise and said, "My name is Peter, and I don't know any John. You must have mistaken me for someone else." Mary regretted her foolishness, and John's uncle punished her severely for breaking the jug, saying, "I will deduct its price from your wages." But she didn't listen, as she wondered if the ravens had heard her song and revealed her secret. That evening, Mary saw the bird circling the barn, and John spoke from its belly, "Mary, how are you? What did you have for dinner?" She replied, "Terrible, I had bran for dinner." He answered, "From that state." John's uncle passed by at that moment and heard her. The next day, he gave her a room in his house, allowing her to rest. She had couscous with meat for dinner. When evening came, the bird circled the house again, and John spoke, "Mary, how are you?" She replied, "Your uncle has been kind to me, and today I am full." John said, "My heart is at ease, and my soul is happy for you." The bird circled every evening, and John's uncle noticed Mary was afraid whenever she saw it, running to hide in her room. He went to a sorcerer and told him the story. The sorcerer said, "The dark-skinned girl is running from the ogre, who has turned into a bird that knows secrets. In its belly, there is a lovesick young man from a noble tribe. It seems to know you. You must save him and kill the ogre. If the ogre doesn't get the girl, he will burn the village house by house until you hand her over. Then, he will release the young man from his belly and kill them both, eating them. John's uncle asked, "How can I kill the ogre?" "No one can do that. He is skilled in magic and can't be deceived." The sorcerer said, "If we break his magic, we can defeat him. I will write an incantation with letters from the Quran. Place it in a pile of meat. When the ogre eats it, he won't be able to fly with all he's eaten. He will try to release the young man to lighten his weight. Then shoot him with flaming arrows, burning his feathers, and it will be easy to kill him. The feathers protect him from your sword strikes." John's uncle asked, "Will we truly get rid of the ogre?" "For ages, the tribes have tried without success." The sorcerer replied, "They lacked cunning. Strength alone doesn't work against the ogre. I hope this time will be his end." John's uncle chose a fat bull, slaughtered it, cut the meat, and made a large pile. He placed the incantation in the center of a piece of meat and spent the day keeping away eagles and dogs. When the bird saw the pile, greed blinded it, and it landed to eat until it was full. When it tried to fly, it couldn't and started spinning around in confusion, not understanding what was happening. It moved away from the village to avoid being seen, then vomited the maid and John. The bird felt relieved, tied them to a tree trunk, and said, "I will get Mary and kill you all. My patience has run out, and this girl is more cunning than I thought. It's time to teach her a lesson. I will kill her and watch her die slowly." While the bird was flapping its wings to fly, it heard the whizzing of an arrow from the forest, hitting it. Seeing the flames ignite its feathers, it laughed and said, "One arrow won't burn my feathers. Now I'll fly and burn you all, you fools." But before it could finish, flaming arrows shot from every direction, as the entire village had come to help John's uncle. The ogre screamed, "I've fallen into a trap. No one fears me in this forest anymore." It tried to change into a wild boar to escape quickly but couldn't. "My magic is gone, and today is my end." When the villagers saw its weakness, they gathered their courage, attacked it, and pierced it with their swords and spears until they tore it apart. The dogs came and ate its flesh, gnawing on its bones. The villagers then freed the maid and John. When John's uncle saw him, he was astonished and said, "We thought you were dead, and your mother wept for you. Now go bathe, for you smell like the ogre." The next morning, John told his uncle, "I want to marry the dark-skinned girl you have." His uncle was taken aback and said, "When did nobles marry slaves?" John replied, "This is my wish." His uncle asked, "And Mary, have you forgotten her?" John said, "I cannot answer you now. I don't know where she is, but I feel an unusual attachment to this dark-skinned girl." Unable to deny his wish, John's uncle and mother arranged the wedding. After the ceremony, John was alone with his bride. The next morning, he found a beautiful fair-skinned girl combing her hair and looking in the mirror. Astonished, he asked, "What are you doing in my room, and where is the dark-skinned girl?" She turned to him and laughed, saying with charm, "Don't you recognize me, John? I am Mary. My friend the owl turned me into a dark-skinned girl to escape the ogre. He found me, and you know the rest of the story." John's uncle and mother came to congratulate them, feeling great relief. After John's father's death, John was to become the chieftain of the tribe and neighboring tribes. If the nomads knew he married a dark-skinned slave, his stature would diminish and his influence would wane. Their confusion turned to amazement when they saw him with Mary. Her parents also heard of her return and marriage and came with their people to see her. The village was filled with guests, drums were played, and joy spread as John and Mary celebrated their wedding and the ogre's defeat, with its head hung on a tree. Mary lived happily with John, enjoying great happiness. That was a tale from a distant time. Now, it remains a story we tell, passed down from ancestors and elders during cold days. Days of simplicity, purity, and innocence. And so my story ends. I hope you liked it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to receive all that is new. Have a nice day.